The air was thick with the stench of decay, the scent of rotting wood, and something darker that pressed into the lungs. The town of Eldergrove had always been a place of whispers, a small, isolated community nestled deep in the hills. It had faded from most maps, its name a mere echo in the annals of history. But what remained, the stories, the legends, the rumors, carried with them a weight far darker than the town itself. No one talked about it outright, but there was always a tension in the air. People had their eyes cast downward whenever someone mentioned the church. The old church at the center of the town, a crumbling structure that had seen generations come and go, standing as a silent witness to something that no one dared to understand fully. Nathaniel Blake had always heard the rumors, growing up as a boy in Eldergrove. His father, a preacher in the local church, had raised him in the ways of faith, instilling in him the importance of duty, of doing right by the Lord. But Nathaniel had grown skeptical over the years. The world had changed around him, and the small town of Eldergrove seemed to grow more distant from the light every day. It was a cold November evening when Nathaniel's journey began, the night thick with fog as he stepped out into the streets, after yet another long day of staring at the pulpit, his father's sermons ringing in his ears. He had been feeling uneasy, a sensation that had gnawed at him ever since he returned to Eldergrove to take up his father's mantle after his sudden death a few months earlier. There was a rumor that Nathaniel had heard 100 times, but one that still unsettled him every time it came up, that the town's church had once been home to something powerful. It was said that a man had once arrived in Eldergrove many years ago, a man with a strange, knowing gaze and a voice that could quiet the winds. They called him Jesus, but he wasn't like the Jesus the townspeople had grown up hearing about. This one had brought with him something that could only be described as a gift that would, inevitably, lead the town into darkness. Nathaniel didn't believe in such tales. They were mere folklore, remnants of a time when fear had twisted the truth. But as the days wore on and the fog seemed to thicken, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to see the truth. On that fateful night, as the wind howled and the moon cast long shadows on the earth, Nathaniel made his way toward the church. He had heard the bells toll, each ring carrying a haunting echo, and his curiosity got the better of him. His steps were hesitant, but there was something calling him, something that urged him to enter. When he reached the church, the doors stood ajar, creaking in the breeze as if they were inviting him in. He hesitated for a moment, the chill of the night seeping into his bones before stepping inside. The air was stale, thick with dust, and the sound of his footsteps echoed in the silence. The pews were empty, save for the flickering of a single candle burning on the altar. At the far end of the church, standing in front of the altar, was a man. His back was to Nathaniel, but he could feel the power radiating from him, an unearthly presence that made the hairs on his neck stand up. The man wore a long white robe that shimmered in the dim light, and his hair, dark and unruly, fell over his shoulders in waves. "Who are you?" Nathaniel's voice was barely a whisper, the words choking in his throat. The man turned slowly, his face now illuminated by the flickering candlelight. His eyes, deep, dark eyes, locked onto Nathaniel's, and in that moment, everything around him seemed to fall away. There was something wrong about him, something deeply unsettling. His face was both familiar and foreign, a twisted reflection of what should have been divine. "I am he," the man spoke, his voice smooth like a whisper from the grave. "I am the one who was promised." Nathaniel took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The words reverberated in his mind, a ringing that wouldn't stop. He knew this man. This was the Jesus of the town's stories. But the stories had never described him like this. This man wasn't the savior. He was something else, something much darker. "You're not," Nathaniel stammered, unable to finish his sentence. "You're not him?" "Oh, but I am," the man said, taking a step forward. "I have been here before. I have come for you all." The man's eyes never left Nathaniel's. They burned with a fire that was not of this world, a fire that seemed to consume everything in its path. Nathaniel's mind raced as he backed away, his feet stumbling on the floor, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The man smiled, a slow, knowing smile. You see, the truth has always been here, buried beneath the earth. But now it will rise. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The walls pulsed, the floor trembled beneath Nathaniel's feet. The very building seemed to be alive, as if church itself was breathing. The man's figure began to distort, his body stretching and twisting in unnatural ways, his eyes growing larger, his hands elongating with claws. "No!" Nathaniel screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the noise that erupted around him. The floor cracked open, and from beneath, dark tendrils of smoke and ash began to rise. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows across the room. The man's face changed again, no longer human but something monstrous. His smile widened impossibly, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many, a mouth that seemed to stretch back into darkness. "I am not the Jesus you know," the creature hissed. "I am something far older, far more powerful. I have waited for centuries, hidden beneath the earth, and now I have come to claim what is mine." Nathaniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the ground beneath him trembling violently. He turned to run, but the church had become a labyrinth. The walls seemed to shift, and every doorway he passed led him deeper into the nightmare. The man, no, the creature, was everywhere, its voice echoing in his ears, its presence suffocating him. "You cannot escape," the creature whispered. "You are already mine." The ground beneath Nathaniel's feet crumbled, and he fell into darkness, the air growing colder with every passing second. He tumbled through endless corridors of stone, his hands scraping against rough surfaces, his mind a blur of terror and confusion. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. Nathaniel found himself lying in a vast, cavernous chamber. The walls were slick with something that glistened, something alive. The air was thick, oppressive, and the only light came from a flickering flame deep within the chamber. As Nathaniel struggled to his feet, he realized he was no longer alone. The man, no, the creature, stood before him, its form towering over him, its eyes burning with the hunger of centuries. "You have come to understand, Nathaniel," the creature said, its voice a low growl. "You have come to learn the truth." Nathaniel's eyes widened as he saw what lay before him. The walls were lined with symbols, ancient and twisted, marking the place as something sacred. But what truly made his stomach turn was what he saw in the center of the chamber, a large stone altar, slick with blood, and upon it, a body. His body. "No," Nathaniel whispered, his voice cracking as he staggered back. The creature's smile widened. "Yes, it has always been you. You were never meant to be the savior of this town. You were meant to be its sacrifice." With a final guttural laugh, the creature reached out and seized Nathaniel, pulling him toward the altar. The stone was cold beneath his back, and as he struggled, he could feel his strength draining, his life force being pulled from him. And then, in a moment of horrific clarity, Nathaniel understood. The creature, the false Jesus, had been using the town for centuries. It had promised power, salvation, but in reality, it had been feeding off the lives of those it deceived. And now it had come to claim its final prize, Nathaniel himself. As the darkness consumed him, Nathaniel screamed, but his voice was drowned in the laughter of the false Jesus, whose grin stretched impossibly wide. And then everything went black.